welcome to the second episode of the Saratoga Speaks series. This episode and the following two episodes will be on climate change and sustainability. And with us today is Gary from the Harker Green Team.
My name is Gary. I'm a sophomore at Harker, and currently I am the public relations officer at the Harker Green Team. And basically, what the Harker Green Team aims to do is to create a sustainable and healthy Harker community. So this can range from anything from basically educating students or faculty on before when we were in person, the sort of single-use plastics served at the cafeteria, or it could be giving workshops about how we can preserve ocean wildlife. It really extends across a variety of environmentally related topics. The green team for us, or the way it has always been structured since I've been here, was we sort of separate into smaller sub teams as soon as after each school year starts. So last year there were meat free Mondays, or a lot of different sub teams, and each year they're different depending on what sort of issues are at hand. Like last year we were in person, so we did have to deal with food consumption. But for example, this year we didn't really have to deal with that because we're online. So we actually created a new sub team, and I've been really active within this. It's called forest legislation, because I know last year there were a lot of really severe wildfires, and um, being going virtual actually made it a lot easier for us to sort of contact and meet with legislators and hopefully enact some sort of legislative change. So far, what we've been doing is reaching out to a lot of different professionals, such as people involved with the Sierra Club, or a lot of different research groups, or groups that are very knowledgeable in the field of forestry and how to prevent wildfires. So we've been reaching out to a lot of people over the past few months to sort of gather a lot of information and ways we can sort of help.
So, what exactly is climate change or environmental degradation, and what are the implications?
Okay, so I think climate change is one kind of phenomenon. It's quite general, but the term environmental degradation is even more general than climate change. So, environmental degradation would be the big umbrella term, and one section of that would be climate change. And so, essentially, climate change is when long-term weather conditions in an area change unnaturally, and by that I mean usually it's primarily caused by human activity. And yes, there is climate change that occurs naturally, and that's how events like the ice age, or many different climate patterns have happened in the past, and these patterns do tend to change over time. But what we're seeing now is that because of um, post-industrial revolution, human activity, this climate changing it throughout the world has been more significant and more devastating than it has ever been in the past. And that's why a lot of climate scientists are really concerned about this, because it's the magnitude of it is really in compare or not you can't really compare it to the past, because it's so much more worse than it is before. And I think the implications of that can range a lot. In terms of just climate change, we know that a lot of species going extinct, that is a huge problem. And in addition to that, human lives are impacted. Just here in the US, every year, hurricanes get stronger by the year. And same just here in California, we can see how the wildfires get like noticeably worse year by year. Last year, how the sky went from blue to gray and then to orange, that, things that you would probably never have seen in the past. It was just really surprising and devastating, honestly, to see. So that's in terms of personally, that's the sort of implications you can see from climate change. But more on the topic of environmental degradation, I think that would be that would include anything. So plastic pollution, air pollution, water pollution. I think that essentially just causing our environment to deteriorate, that has a lot of other implications connected to that as well.
Right, so another question which we have is the impact of plastics on climate change. Obviously, we know the Green Team at school has really tried to help with that in the case of boba. I remember you guys transitioned to paper straws, or not really paper straws, but it was yeah, paper straws. Um, but obviously, plastic has a very big effect on our like oceans and the sea animals which are in the ocean. So just in general, if you can sum up like the impact of plastics, other than like I guess the generals of what people know, then that would be great.
Yeah, personally or I think plastics, like every single part of like plastics is like pretty detrimental to climate change. Starting from like just production, because plastics are actually made from like fossil fuels, and just the extraction of fossil fuels is a very intensive process, and just doing that what can result in a lot of carbon emissions. And in addition to that, when you're manufacturing plastics, a lot of these plastics are just intended for a single use. So you're spending a lot of energy trying to sort of extract materials needed for plastics, and then you're only using it once. So just like the wastefulness of that really contributes to climate change as well, because you're not really utilizing the full potential of the material. Essentially, you're creating like a super strong material, but for purposes that don't really require that. And after you throw the plastics away, actually, I think um, in terms of climate change, it may not be the main contributor after the point where it's being used, but it does contribute to a lot of pollution issues, because plastics, they take a long time to decompose. And in addition to that, they break into smaller and smaller pieces. So you think that they're gone, but they're actually still like, they still exist, but just in a very, very small form. So like plastic particles, currently you can find them like in the bodies of like fish in oceans, or I think even a new study, I think even found that there's like plastic microplastics in human bodies too. So it's really spreading to every like single corner of the planet. And more towards climate change, I think the prevalence of a lot of these plastics, like especially on the ocean, if you have a lot of plastic waste at the surface, and it'll essentially act like a tiny greenhouse itself. Like the sunlight goes into the ocean, and basically the plastic at the top actually reflects the light and keep traps the heat underneath in the ocean water, and that can lead to rising sea levels or rising ocean temperatures, and that is um, resulting in climate change as well. So
And now that we've essentially established the issue of climate change, then I want to discuss what can we as individuals do to mitigate the effects of climate change and to also push for environmental sustainability.
yeah, of course. So I think the general like narrative that most people face, and maybe you've heard about it from maybe friends or family, is just reducing your own carbon footprint. And that's basically just what actions can you do yourself to sort of change and maybe be more sustainable. And usually these ideas are pitched to us as like, oh, turning off electricity when you're not using it. Don't shower for too long. And like these actions, they do like definitely contribute to like sort of being more environmentally friendly, but I think as individuals we have a lot more power than that. And I think this whole narrative of just reducing your own carbon footprint is largely it's not completely accurate. And the fact that the majority of the emissions produced currently are by big corporations, and by sort of emphasizing this supposed reducing your own carbon footprint, they're actually shifting the issue from one to the other. So personally, I feel like the best sort of individual impact we can have is to sort of let your legislators or the representatives who represent where you live or represent you in any way, let them know that you care about the environment and what issues specifically you care about the most. I think, yes, like these small actions that you do at home definitely do help, but in the greater scheme of things, having like using your own voice, especially as youth, a lot of officials really like to hear from their younger constituents. Being able to reach out to them and let them know about what issues you care about, I think that definitely creates a much larger impact. And in addition to just using your voice, I think we as consumers in like a capitalist society, we have a lot of purchasing power. So if you see something that potentially would not be beneficial for the environment, you can choose not to buy that. And when you're doing that, you're actually having a very large impact because we are a society that runs on sort of like making profits. So when you're not actually supporting like a specific area or specific product, and you can get a lot of people to not do that, you actually, I think that can create the most change out of everything I've mentioned before.
Yeah, I really like how you said that we should be using, well, in a sense, you said that we should be using politics and legislation as a tool, instead of, or in addition to these like little things that we do. I think that's a really like big point that people have yet to like see, um, just because like the narrative, as you said, has been like so like forced upon us, or that oh we can get or overcome the effects of environmental degradation, climate change, pollution by, shortening our showers, or, um, all of these like little like things that we do. But I really think that, um, using like using our influence, um, as constituents, is such like a big tool and a powerful tool that we should encourage youth to utilize. But moving into our next question, or is kind of, we've already touched on this, but what is the role of the government to combat the effects of environmental degradation?
We can sort of influence politics a lot, especially as young people. But I think in terms of the government, a lot of work has to be done backhand. And yes, we can sort of pitch our ideas to the government, but we do not all have political degrees, so we're not like the best. We can't personally, like as a 15-year-old, we can't be a politician. There's things that they have to do, and um, I think I think just more in general, there's a very, like, at least in the US, there's a very, like, it's pretty clear that economics and profitability have a very large impact on how the government works.
Other than other than the Harker Green Team, for anyone who does not go to Harker, do you know any outside organizations or outside um, like volunteer options which they can do to sort of help this, other than contacting like legislators and etc.
Yeah, of course. So there's actually a lot of different groups that do put a lot of time and effort into like environmental work, and um, there's a lot. And from my personal experience, it's still not very like aimed towards youth. I feel like a lot of youth, when they're starting and they are really passionate about the environment, they don't have a lot of like knowledge or resources on like how they can get involved, so they end up like creating their own organizations and like working with other youth. And I think that's really great that like a lot of youth are able to collaborate and work on that together. But I think from a, like a greater, like more general perspective, we want to be more united in terms of the work that we do. If you have a lot of different separate groups working at their own pace, at their own level, like sort of separated, yes, there's progress, but it's very like fragmented, and it's a little bit hard to sort of see things from a bigger perspective if you're just within a smaller group. And I think joining an organization that has already a very like rigid idea, like mission statements, they know what they're doing and they have like a specific way they want to achieve their goals. I think that is the best way to get involved in. And so some groups I can just name right now are like the Climate Reality Project, which is founded by former Vice President Al Gore. Um, in addition to that, there's like the Sierra Club, 350 Silicon Valley, and some of these are like more like location specific. Like the few I listed before, they have chapters here in the Bay Area. Um, and like larger groups will have chapters throughout the country, throughout the world. So if you're not from here, you can just see what's in your local area. And specifically for here with like more local groups, I guess I could say like Silicon Valley Youth Climate Action, or like Sunrise, or a lot of these groups that already have like a lot going on. So if you join, you know that you'll be putting in work and this work will have a really big impact. Like I think that's the best way to get started.
Yeah, and I think that, I know this is a point you made kind of, later, just on what the interests are, and are you? I think you touched on that a bit when you talked about the differences within the Democratic and Republican Party. But I think what's really interesting, and this is something that one of my former bosses actually told me, is that progress comes when you merge the self interest of an individual within a group with their best interest, right? I think that we can say that ameliorating the ameliorating climate change and environmental degradation is in everybody's best interest, right? Just because like this is our world, we should take the time and the effort to preserve it and protect it. But it's often not in everybody's self interest. We have a lot of groups that are lobbying for, I know you talked about, how Trump just opened up the Alaskan or the Arctic refuge for drilling, right? That's for profit, and that's what we consider in some people's self interest. So I think we should really, or we as a society should find a way to intersection and have these people understand that what's in their best interest should also be in their self interest. I think that's just a point to consider.
I think when you brought up interest, that like gave me something else I wanted to say. I guess just knowing what your self-interest is really important because if you are planning on getting involved, there's a lot of options, a lot of groups you can sort of go with when you start. And so I think my advice is to do your homework, really understand what sort of group you're getting into doing. I think your work, your time, your resources are very valuable and you want to make sure you're putting that into something that will result in a change that you're satisfied with. So if you're doing a lot of work, and there's lots of ways to get involved and try to save our environment, but if there's something like maybe that you aren't really comfortable with, I think definitely maybe have a lot of other or a couple other options available so you can sort of see which ones that you like the most and stick with that instead.
Thank you guys so much for joining us for this episode. We hope you guys enjoyed it, and we also hope that you guys will join in for our next episode in our sub-series for climate change.